Everybody keeps arguing about Bleu Davinci and BMF. Some people say he told, some people say he didn't. Some people say it was only a safety valve. Some people say a safety valve is just a legal way to say cooperation. And honestly, that's where the pressure starts. Because I'm not here to play word games. If you provide information and evidence to the government, that is cooperation. You can call it a safety valve. You can call it sentencing relief. You can say it's different from taking a stand. You can say it's different from a 5K. But if you sat down with the government and gave information, people from the streets are going to look at that as cooperation. That's not confusing. That's not complicated. That's the uncomfortable part. But here's where the story gets deeper. The real question is not just, did Blue talk? The safety valve conversation already tells you information had to be provided. The real question is, what did he say? Who did he say it about? Was the information useful? Did it help the government convict anybody? Did he testify? And did he bury people? And why have people not seen the full debrief transcripts? That's the part that keeps this conversation alive. Because if somebody is accused of telling and they say, no, I didn't tell on anybody, then the transcript becomes everything. Not an interview, not a clip, not a social media explanation, not somebody saying, trust me, bro. You get the actual debrief transcript because that's where the real answers live. If the debrief shows he only talked about himself, that changes the conversation. If the debrief shows he gave information only concerning himself, that changes the conversation. If the debrief shows he named people, explained roles, helped connect dots, or gave the government something they used, that changes the conversation too. That's why the transcript matters. And that's why people look at it sideways when the transcript does not come out. Because the public is left with a gap. And when there is a gap, the internet fills it in. That does not automatically prove he buried somebody, but it does explain why people don't let the jacket go. Because a safety valve is not nothing. Let's be honest about that. The safety valve is not just, I showed up to court and got lucky. It requires a defendant to truthfully provide the government all information and evidence they have about the offense-related conduct. So when people say he got a safety valve, they're not just saying a random legal phrase. They're saying there was a sit down, there was a proffer, there was a conversation with the government, there was information given. That is why street people reacted to it the way they did. Because in that world, sitting down with the government is already enough for some people. They don't care if it was useful. They don't care if you testified. They don't care if somebody got convicted behind it. They hear that you gave information, and that is the end of the conversation for them. And I understand why, but the pressure room has to separate emotion from paperwork because there are levels to this. There's talking, there's providing information, there is safety valve, there is substantial assistance, there's testifying, there's taking a stand, and there's giving new information. Those are not all the same thing, but the internet loves to collapse everything into one word. Rap. Once that word enters the room, people stop reading. They stop asking questions. They stop separating levels. They just throw the jacket and keep moving. But if we're going to talk about Bleu Davinci, we have to be honest on both sides. The people defending him have to stop acting like the safety valve is nothing, because it is not nothing. If the safety valve required him to provide information and evidence, then yes, by street standards, people are going to call that cooperation. That's a fair reaction. But the people attacking him also have to stop turning safety valve into claims that have not been proven. Because saying he provided information is one thing. Saying he testified is another thing. Saying his information was useful is another thing. Saying he brought down BMF is a much heavier claim. And the heavier the claim, the heavier the proof needs to be. That's where this conversation gets sloppy. People go from, he got a safety valve, he told, to he brought down BMF, to he buried everybody. But where's the step-by-step proof of that? Where's the transcript? Where's the testimony? Where's the person who went to prison because of his words? Where's the document showing the government used his information to build the case? Where's the record showing he took the stand against other defendants? Because according to reporting from the time, Bleu received a sentence below what the government recommended, partly because he agreed to share information. That's the uncomfortable part. But the same reporting also said the information was not useful because the government already had most of BMF's cases. But let me make this clear. Confirming what the government has, corroborating what they have, is snitching because you're confirming that the evidence that they have is true. That is also part of the story. Now here's where Bleu's problem gets worse. People say he refused to show the debrief transcripts. And that's the part that looks suspect to a lot of people. Because if the defense is, I didn't hurt anybody, then people want to see what was actually said. If the defense is, the government already had everything, then people want to see the transcript. If the defense is, I never testified, that's one point, but the debrief is still missing the piece. Because testimony is not the only way information can matter. A person can give information without taking the stand. A person can confirm things the government already suspected. A person can explain structure. A person can identify roles. A person can fill in background. A person can also talk about their own involvement and still mention other people. So when people ask for the debrief transcript, they're not asking for nothing. They're asking for the part that would show whether the information was harmless or harmful. And if that transcript never gets shown, people are going to keep asking these questions. That does not automatically prove the worst, but it does keep the pressure alive. Because when you're fighting a snitch jacket, the cleanest way to fight it is with documentation. Not emotion, not interviews, not yelling, not everybody else told too. Documentation. If the transcript clears you, show the transcript. If the transcript proves you only talked about your own conduct, show the transcript. Because without that, people are left with a legal fact and a missing document. The legal fact is safety valve requires information. The missing document is what actually was said. Now, some people are going to say, why are we even debating about this? He provided information. That's enough. And from a street code perspective, I agree with that. Some people do not need another paragraph. Some people do not need another transcript. They hear provided information to the government and that jacket is already on. That is their standard. But if the conversation is about the full BMF story, then the details still matter. Because the question is, not only did Bleu cross a street code line, the question is, did Bleu bring BMF down? Thanks for watching. It's the Pressure Room. No pressure, no diamonds.